Really felt like because we're new to you and you're new to us, we wanted to share with you what God's saying to our church in Zim. One of the things that I do with our leadership team, we're a part of a team of leaders that is bivocational. None of us take a salary as we lead the church that God's put us in there in Zimbabwe. We all run our own businesses and do it that way. And what we do every year is I get the team away and we spend about a week, if we can, outside of town, spending some time in the presence of the Lord, seeking God about the year that we're going into. It's important to know our season. There's nothing more frustrating than going out to, if you are in the wrong season, you're going to expect the wrong things out of life. If it's sowing time, if it's time to get out there and break up the fallow ground and you go out there looking for vegetables, you're going to be disappointed. And too much of the church thinks every day is harvest time. Every day is collection, right? Every day is blessing. That's not how God works. There are times and seasons, and there's a time for everything. And sometimes it's hard work time. Sometimes it's time to put in the graft, as we would say, and work hard and to till the ground and to sow the seeds. And that's not a time that you're reaping the harvest. That's a time that you're doing the work. The same is true if you go out and it's time to harvest and you go out there and start digging up everything that's grown, you're going to mess up your harvest, right? And so it's important to know the season that you're in. And so as we entered into 2023, this was the word that God gave us as a leadership team. There are 5 things that the Lord spoke to us about 2023. And I want to share those with you this morning because I believe that they don't just apply to Renewal Fellowship and what's happening in Zimbabwe. I believe they'll apply to your lives as well. And so I want to talk to you about how to live in 2023. The first thing that God spoke to us was that He has been working in the darkness. We were coming out of this COVID period, this difficult time where the world went nuts, and a lot of people didn't know how to handle all of that. And one of the things that we need to be reminded of is that God didn't get surprised by COVID. He knew what was coming. He was preparing us for that. I can tell you right now that the decade. You all followed. I should have asked you this yesterday. Do you understand the Jewish calendar? Do you understand that God's not on the same calendar that we are? That His new year is not on January 1st. It falls somewhere around the fall, is the beginning of the year for Him. And so when the new decade began, the decade of the 20s, right? 2020 began. For us, in our Greco-Roman culture, 2020 would speak of vision, right? 2020 vision is to have clarity of vision, and so that's an important thing. In the Hebrew, the year was the year 5780, and the number 80 is represented in Hebrew by the letter Pei, and the letter Pei is a pictorial that represents an open mouth. The decade of the 80s was a prophetic decade. As we came into September of 2019, and that year began on the Jewish calendar, it was a year that God was saying, speak prophetically. I love that you guys are so open to the prophetic. But it was interesting to me that we began that decade, and within 3 months, what did the enemy do? He told everybody to put a mask on. Shut your mouth. That is by no means insignificant. The enemy wanted to shut down the prophetic decade that we entered into. We're now 3 years into that, and it's still the decade of the Pei, the open mouth, declaring, allowing God to do what He did today, where words of knowledge come, words of prophecy come, where we speak the mind and the heart of God, because the Pei itself declares the very origins of creation. In the beginning, God said, right? And so God declares into being the things that He wants to come. And as we enter into these last days, it is important for us to be speaking the heart and the mind of God into the lives that we live so that we can experience the fullness of what He has for us. And so going into this, we had to realize that God was working in the darkness. Well, the enemy saw the prophetic season that we were entering into and tried to shut it down. God was still working. Amen. When we were home online sign God was working. When we weren't able to gather together and pray with one another, God was still working. Amen? And so he continues to work in the darkness. Job says this in Job chapter 12 and verse 22. He says, he uncovers the mysteries hidden in darkness. He brings light to the deepest gloom. We know that God tells us in Romans chapter 8 and verse 18, one of my favorite verses in the Bible, that says, for we know that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared to the glory that is to be revealed in us. That what we're going through right now is nothing. It will be a small price to pay when we realize what God is taking us towards. That song that we talked about, Breakthrough Today, you're taking me to it and you're taking me through it. When God takes us through it, it's because he has something glorious on the other side that he wants us to enjoy and to experience. And he tells us in Romans chapter 8 and verse 28, right? Also one of our favorites, that for I know this, that God causes all things, not just some of them. It didn't exclude COVID. There was no little parentheses in there aside from that COVID thing that's coming in 2020, right? God causes all things to work together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And so we can be confident in this, that God is working in the background. Sometimes we go through those dark seasons and we wonder what is going on in there. And Paul talks to us about in Ephesians chapter 3. He's praying for the church and he says, I pray that your roots would go down deep into the love of Christ. And in our dark seasons, that's the time when flowers grow, during this time that we enjoy so much of summer, when we get to see the color and the green and the beauty, all of that we see on the outside, all of the energy of that plant is going into what you can see. But when we go into the winter, do you know what's happening? When you can't see what's going on, the roots are going down deeper. In the dry season, that's when those roots start to push down and look for that water that's underneath the ground that makes us firm and solid in who God's called us to be. And in the dark seasons of life, those come into our life to allow our roots to go down deep. And Paul said that they might go down deep into the love of God, that you might become convinced of the breadth and the height and the depth of the love of God, that you might walk in the fullness of what he's called you to be. So we are reminded in this season that God works in the darkness. Amen.